Hi, I'm Max Kaiser. Welcome to On the Edge. Time now to go to Chile and speak with Gonzalo Lira of the Strategic Planning Group. Gonzalo, welcome back to On the Edge.
Max, it's a pleasure being on, as always. Thank you for having me.
All right, Gonzalo, your recent piece is called Full Spectrum Dominance. Tell us about it.
Actually, it's called Full Spectrum Decay. It's about, the United States military has a doctrine called full spectrum dominance. And the concept is for the American military to dominate in every single facet of what they call the battlespace. That is land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. Now, I point out that what we're actually achieving in the United States is having this enormous military that is protecting a hollow shell. Because everything that matters about a country, the health and welfare of its people, the education of the people, its infrastructure, all of these are decaying in the United States, whereas we have this bright and shiny armed force that in a very real sense is sort of pointless. Because, for instance, we have intercontinental ballistic missile submarines, the so-called boomers. These are huge pieces of equipment, multi-billion dollars each. They cost several $100 million a year to operate. And yet they are meeting a military challenge that no longer exists, because the whole rationale for these intercontinental ballistic missile submarines was to give a reply strike in the case of China or the Soviet Union carrying out a surprise first strike against the United States. Now, the likelihood of either Russia or China today carrying out a wide-scale nuclear attack on the United States or Europe is infinitesimal, not to say wholly unlikely. I mean, akin to winning the lottery 3 times in a row. And yet we still have these incredibly expensive pieces of equipment. And now in the United States, they're currently having this game of chicken between the White House and the Congress about the debt ceiling. Now, if these weapon systems were canceled, you'd go a whole long way to clearing out that incredible deficit that the United States has of $1.6 trillion for fiscal year 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. Now, why isn't this done? Well, because it seems to me that the political leadership in the United States has forgotten its purpose, has forgotten what it's about, and the people as well. The American people have become so paranoid about protection and safety that they demand a needless standard of safety that simply cannot be achieved.
Yeah, I don't really get it, because in American mythology, they have heroes such as Chuck Yeager, the man who broke the sound barrier. And if you've seen the movie The Right Stuff, Chuck Yeager straps himself into a tin can with a rocket engine, taking extraordinary risk to achieve his dream of breaking the sound barrier. He didn't ask the government and the municipality and the local government to guarantee that there wouldn't be any accident, that there wasn't an enormous net underneath the flight path of the rocket ship, the plane that he was driving, that there were extra cushions in the cockpit. He took risks, and this has been the whole point of the United States, is that it rewards risk takers. But now, post 9/11, they are making it impossible for people to even take risks. Therefore, the result is predictable. You end up in this slothful, bureaucratic, sclerotic nightmare of boring people who all they do is talk about these existential threats that don't exist. But now you mentioned the wasted money on these weapon systems that have a low probability of ever being used. But isn't it even worse than that? Because not only is there a low probability of using these weapon systems, the fact is, in the currency war that the U.S. is now engaged in, it's losing. And they're not doing anything to defend themselves against the onslaught of incoming ballistic financial weapons of mass destruction that's killing the economy right now. Why? How come they're not even fighting this war?
No, you're absolutely right. But just to go back a little bit to what you were talking about Chuck Yeager, somebody I admire tremendously. And I think that everybody who's either seen the movie The Right Stuff or read the book by Tom Wolfe is incredibly impressed by him. He dared. Now, the problem today that we have is that the American people as a whole, and perhaps this is the fault of the leadership, the American people are incredibly timid. They don't dare. As you say, they demand a safety net under every single venture that they embark in. And if there is ever even the risk of failure, it has to be torqued down and eliminated. Now, it would seem to me that this mentality is what led us to the 2008 financial crisis. In the 2000 financial aid crisis, what happened? The banks were bailed out rather than allowed to fail because there was such a fear of a quote-unquote systemic collapse, which I think is a ridiculous notion. But there was such a fear of this that the government, both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, did everything in their power to save these banks rather than allow them to fail. I mean, we have the phrase too big to fail for a reason. And that it's a cliche because it's been used so often. And it's a policy mentality which is eating away at what makes America great. You were talking about Chuck Yeager, a great American. Some people could say, well, maybe he was foolhardy. Well, maybe, but he dared to do something great. And there are other countless stories of Americans daring to do great things. But nowadays, we have a mentality in the zeitgeist and in the policy, in the halls of Congress and the White House, whereby there cannot be any risk and any possibility of failure has to be rescued. Now, right now, we are looking at Bank of America. Bank of America is looking like it's teetering. It just had tremendous write-offs from its countrywide investment and also something that's starting to come up. It has tremendous exposure to European sovereign debt. I mean, after all, this is the reason that Timothy Geithner, back in December of 2010, told the UK and the ECB and the others when they were discussing about the possibility of an Irish default, told them that he would not accept an Irish default because it turns out that B of A has written so many credit default swaps on European sovereign debt that if there is a default event in Ireland or any of the other pigs, then B of A is going to take a huge hit that will potentially land it in insolvency. Now, what kind of government do we have that goes out of its way to protect insolvent institutions? All these people keep saying that they have to let the market do its work, let the invisible hand of capitalism go ahead and let the healthy thrive and the unhealthy fail. Well, what is it when you have the Treasury Secretary of the United States going out of his way to save an insolvent institution? And that's the problem with this mentality of trying to protect everything and not allowing any failure under any circumstance. You start getting this rot. And you and I have discussed this, Max, on multiple occasions of the issue of the banksters and how the banksters and the political classes are in bed with one another. But if we had a zeitgeist mentality, a mentality among the people of not allowing our elected representatives to coddle these people and to actually go ahead and let the markets do their duty and let these institutions fail, I think that at the end of the day, we would have a much healthier country and a much brighter future. But as it is, we're so trying to protect everything that we are inviting greater and greater failure and a rot that is coming from within.
All right, Gonzalo Lira, I want to talk about 9/11, 1973, which, of course, is the date of the coup d'etat in Chile. And you had the installation of Augusto Pinochet, Milton Friedman's neoliberal experimentation applied to a country. Milton Friedman from the Chicago School, which is the hotbed of neoliberal post-World War II American economic thinking, applied to many countries in Latin America, Central America, Asia, around the world. It's part of the post-World War II empire, a soft empire driven by the dollar reserve and this neoliberal model, and really, to be quite frank, rent-seeking from America as they take over various key infrastructures and businesses of countries around the world. Flash forward to 9/11, 2001. Now, in that case, they had an event that was in part driven by imperial overstretch from the United States. And to get back to what you're talking about in terms of the Chuck Yeager aspect of America, if America was just a secular society that was dedicated to free markets, wouldn't the correct response to 9/11 have been, you win some, you lose some? we're going to fall. We fell down. Let's pick ourselves up. We'll rebuild the towers. And, we do try to overreach our empire around the world. And we did get tagged on that day. But so what? We'll just keep going. Why did they make it into a religious war?
Well, I think because it benefited a lot of people. 9/11 benefited, of course, the military-industrial complex because the American military, following the collapse of the Warsaw Pact nations, had no reason for being, the enormous military that existed at the time. And the American military was actively seeking a new role for itself in a post-Cold War world. And on the other hand, you had a man, George W. Bush, of limited abilities at best, who was trying to somehow measure up to his father, who, for all his faults, was actually a fairly decent president. I mean, I think that all of us would agree that George Herbert Walker Bush was a much better president than either Mr. Clinton or his son Bush the Younger or Mr. Obama. So you had a confluence of circumstances coming together between a military that didn't know what to do following the end of the Cold War, a president of limited abilities, and a political establishment, the right-wing political establishment, that was pseudo-religious in its outlook and looking for a kind of, I think you would call it maybe a messianic complex insofar as the United States' role in the rest of the world is concerned, an aggressive, expansionist American role insofar as the rest of the world is concerned. And so 9/11 became the perfect vehicle for this confluence of different influences to go out and basically ruin the United States by overextension.
Okay, so now let's talk about Fox News for a second. The Tea Party in America, this recent phenomenon of folks dressed up in silly costumes, they're mostly financed by the oil industry, including Exxon and the Koch industries, the two Koch brothers. Fox News, which is 9% owned by Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. What role does oil in the military play in the military-industrial complex and Murdoch in his media empire? How does that overlap the military-industrial complex, as that term is understood? And what are we seeing here now, with especially Murdoch now on the back foot?
Well, Murdoch is in serious trouble because Murdoch, as you know, is Australian-born, but he's currently an American citizen, as is his son, James, who is the heir apparent. Now, both of them potentially are exposed to the American law, the Corrupt Foreign Practices Act, passed during the Carter administration, which specifically prohibits American citizens from engaging in, as the act says, corrupt foreign practices, that is, paying off foreign officials. We usually think of the Corrupt Foreign Practices Act as applying to American executives paying off tin pot dictators in African countries. We don't expect it to be paying off UK officials, but that's exactly what happened. As the recent resignation of the head of Scotland Yard shows, this is a serious problem that we're having in the UK of corrupt foreign practices. Now, under American law, both James Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch himself could potentially face a criminal investigation and criminal charges and potentially jail time because of these payoffs that News of the World and the other Murdoch-owned tabloids carried out in the United Kingdom. This is big, and people don't quite realize how big this is. I mean, it's growing like a cancer, and a fast-moving cancer. This is like Watergate. Of course, in the United Kingdom, it's a huge scandal. In the United States, it's starting to become a scandal. Now, we're seeing, of course, the Murdoch properties, like the Wall Street Journal, like Fox News, either ignoring this event or downplaying it. There have been some editorials in the Wall Street Journal saying that, oh, this isn't a really big deal, but it is a big deal. And potentially we could see the downfall of the Murdoch empire, which is going to be huge because they have played a pivotal role over the last 30 years in both American and British politics.
All right, now this is, I want to ask you kind of a big picture question here. You're in Chile, you're a blogger and an independent broadcaster and, completely divorced from mainstream media by design, because in the blogosphere, there is wide-scale criticism of mainstream media as being completely controlled by military-industrial complex, or they have an agenda that supports banking interests. Now, here you have Murdoch, who suddenly his comeuppance is exemplary of all the evils of mainstream media that the bloggers have been talking about. So going forward, given the weaknesses that are part of the blogosphere, certainly it's not a perfect situation. But will people now understand the importance of independent media in ways that they didn't understand it before or appreciate it? Is independent media and blogging and podcasting and everything that goes with it going to increase? And who are going to be the winners and losers? If Murdoch's empire collapses and takes that whole model down with it, who are the winners and losers post-Murdoch?
Well, I actually don't think that the Murdoch empire will collapse and into a heap of rubble, because all of these businesses are exceedingly profitable businesses. I mean, every unit of News Corp is a profitable business. Ironically, the only units that are not profitable are its UK newspaper operation.
Yeah, but those are lost leaders, Gonzalo. Those are lost leaders because they're used to buy off politicians to deregulate mainstream media outlets and satellite monopoly positions. It's all by design. You know, he makes a lot of money in the news TV business only because he takes losses on the newspaper business because he is manipulating election outcomes.
Well, be that as it may, my sense is that the Murdoch scandal, of course, will increase the influence of independent and alternative media, such as blogs, such as independent podcasts. Because people, at the end of the day, they want to be informed. They want to know about reality. I mean, what's really happening, as opposed to the mainstream media spin. And you and I are both on the alternative media side of the equation, as it were. I personally, my motto rather of my blog is strolling along the shores of the mainstream. Because, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the mainstream media is completely corrupt. And the problem also is that some bloggers are beginning to realize that if you aggressively go after different institutions, you are targeted by those institutions. So what is happening is that the powers that be, the people who have money, are using the legal system to stifle debate. That's why so much of mainstream media is so softball and milquetoast, because these media companies are afraid of litigation. The movie The Insider about the whistleblower of the tobacco industry, that explains how it is done. Corporations with a lot of money that can hire very good lawyers threaten to sue, or actually go ahead and do sue. And the suit is so expensive that it's not worthwhile to report the important news. So all of this goes to a corporate kleptocracy that has run amok. And we have, of course, a political leadership that is in the pockets of these kleptocrats. And so it seems to me that we have to come to a situation where there is a clear break. I hope that the Murdoch situation is this clear break, whereby, this huge scandal that is engulfing the Murdoch empire will result in some kind of sanity, some kind of new regulation, or some kind of new framework. I would prefer framework as opposed to regulation, that would allow people to be informed and not stifle debate as is currently stifled on the mainstream media. I mean, you and I have both been on mainstream media programs, and we both know that there are some things that are just simply too hot to touch. And sometimes, when we are interviewed in the mainstream media, especially, of course, if it's taped, we are subtly edited so as not to step on anybody's toes. And of course, if we're interviewed live, the interviewer takes us down a more softball path and not along a controversial path, because they don't want to talk about certain truths that are affecting us all.
Yeah, I love the phrase you hear from mainstream media outlets. If you start to talk about anything truthful, they say, well, you're obviously very emotional about this. Somehow having emotion about the truth is a part and parcel with being not credible in some way. And you mentioned The Insider with Russell Crowe, a couple of movies that are kind of look inside corruption in a really good way. Syriana with George Clooney, I think, is a must-watch. And then there's this, I think it's called The Constant Gardener. It's about the drug industry.
Yes.
With Ralph Fiennes. Is also kind of a sleeper, but it's another excellent movie that looks at this stuff. Now, We only have a couple minutes left. I want you to review for us where we are on the Gonzalo Lira timeline in terms of hyperinflation.
If you go by the official CPI numbers, we're nowhere near it because consumer price index is very low and everything is wonderful insofar as inflation, insofar as the official numbers are concerned. Now, I endorse John Williams' shadow government stats for an accurate representation of the true figures of both unemployment and inflation. He estimates that current CPI is at about 11.2% year to year. Now, if you're in a grocery store in the United States and you see how the packages have shrunk and have remained at the same price, or how the prices have risen, if you go to the gas pump and somebody tells you there's no inflation, you're going to laugh in their face because there obviously has been inflation. John Williams' shadow stats seems to indicate that it's 11.2%. So in the grand scheme of what I've been discussing insofar as hyperinflation is concerned, we seem to be right on schedule. I was predicting that by the 4th of July, we would have something like 8% inflation. And insofar as the shadow stats are concerned, we have surpassed that number. My sense is that by the end of 2012, we will start to really experience hyperinflation. Now, what can assist in this rise in inflation? Well, the Federal Reserve policy. The Federal Reserve has recently been talking about implementing more quantitative easing. You used the euphemism of using stimulus to help spur the economy. But the only stimulus, of course, that the Federal Reserve has is to print more money. And that's what they did with QE2, which ended this past June. And now it seems that they are preparing the commentariat for another round of quantitative easing, which I think will happen before the end of the year, and it will only add to dollar hyperinflation.
Yeah, well, for several decades, the amount of debt that was growing in the economy was still slightly less than growth. Starting a few years ago, the amount of growth was falling behind the amount of debt. And their solution is to increase the debt, and that's leading to hyperinflation. Well, that's all the time we have on this episode of On the Edge. Gonzalo Lira, thanks so much. Why don't you tell the people your website address?
Yes, you can reach me at www.liraspg.com.
If you want to send me an email, please do so at ontheedge@presstv.com. Until next time, this is Max Kaiser saying bye, y'all.